Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, we need to talk coloring. I have purchased the Pink Fresh Studio Inky Bouquet Bundle. This is a stamp, die, and stencil bundle. I did purchase all three components. I will not be using the stencils today. Maybe I'll use that later this week in a card, but I'm going to be doing some Copic coloring, so I will stamp the main image on a piece of Neenah Solar White Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock. That is my preferred for alcohol marker coloring because I think it's fantastic. That's just why. I will stamp it with an alcohol marker friendly ink, Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. I am going to use the sticky sheet that goes into my MISTI, or the sticky mat that goes into my MISTI, to hopefully keep the paper in place in that bottom left-hand corner. Because when I am done coloring, I want to come and re-stamp it in order to make sure that some of those little details that I may cover over are nice and bold and visible. I will also be using the coordinating die for the image, as well as one of the sentiments from the stamp set and its coordinating die to put together a quick card at the end of our crime discussion. I think that's all about the coloring. Oh, the Copic colors combinations that I used will be listed down below in the description box, along with the sources of my information. So, now that we've discussed, words are hard, the coloring, let's talk about our crime. This week's episode takes us to the state of New York. The area of the state of New York was part of the original territory of the United States. When originally chartered in 1664, it included a much larger area, and over the years, parts of the original territory were sold or traded to other states in the colonies. New York ratified the U.S. Constitution on July 26, 1788, making it the 11th of the original 13 colonies to join the Union. New York is often referred to as New York State to distinguish it from its largest city, New York City. With a total area of just under 55,000 square miles, New York State is the 27th largest state by area, but with just over 20 million people, it is the fourth most populous state in the United States, according to census information from the 2020 census. New York City is famous for pizza and is home to the first ever United States pizzeria. Sorry if I sniffle. Spring has arrived in Virginia, and that means pollen, and that means allergies, and I'm already over it, and it's only March. Anyways, honking your horn is actually illegal in New York City. Who knew? On April 30th, 1789, George Washington was sworn in as the President of the United States at Federal Hall in New York City. Toilet paper was invented by Joseph Gayet of New York City. New York State's Liberty Island is home to the first hospital in the country. New York is also home to the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, One World Trade Center. And after Washington State, New York produces the most apples in the country. New York State was the first state to require automobiles to have license plates. Those license plates were usually made by the individual owners and included the owner's initials. And because it's time to get on to our story, New York is where stenography was first used to transcribe an entire court case. Okay, this sweet girl's name I am going to butcher. Gulima, I think is how you say it. Gullielma. Gulima Sands, mostly known as Elma, was born in 1777. Her month and day were not recorded in her family group sheet that I found, which is really odd. One of the records of the actual transcription of the court case has her name recorded as Julianne, but everything else calls her Julima, and she went by the name of Elma. So we're just going to call her Elma. Elma was the youngest of 9 children born to Nathaniel and Mercy Sands in the Connecticut Valley area of New York State. And it was reported that Elma was members of her family were part of a Quaker community. Sometime around July of 1799, so she would have been about 22, she moved to New York City and lived in a boarding house over the textile factory she worked in. The boarding house was owned by her cousin Catherine and Catherine's husband Elias Rain. And Catherine and Elias were in fact practicing Quakers. There was another boarder living in the house about the same time as Elma, a young man named Levi. Levi Weeks was born October 22nd in 1776 in Goshen, Massachusetts. He was 5 of 10 children born to Thomas and Marcy Weeks, and he was born just 1 year after the death of an older brother who had also been named Levi. But because the older Levi had passed away, his parents, named him Levi as well. This was not an unusual practice in those days, especially with family names. Many times, if a child passed away, that name was then given to another child that was born. However, Levi moved to New York City in 1798 to work for his older brother Ezra as a carpenter. Obviously, Elma and Levi met living in the same boarding house and became friends, and eventually, at least according to her neighbors, their friendship evolved, and based on sounds coming from her room, they had a sexual relationship. And y'all, that is a straight quote from the transcript. It was reported that Elma became pregnant. And that phrase cracks me up. It's like they don't know how it happened. She became pregnant. Oh my goodness, whatever. Elma told her cousin Catherine that she was going to marry the man who had been courting her. It was unclear to me whether she told Catherine she was pregnant or not, but people knew she thought she was pregnant. After telling Catherine that she was going to marry the man who was courting her, she then told her that they were going to elope. So on Sunday night, December 22nd, Elma was heard by witnesses in the boarding house upstairs in her room. She was apparently making a lot of noise, preparing herself to elope with her assumed, fiance, right? At the same time that she was heard upstairs in her room, Levi and another man were sitting in the downstairs sitting room. The other person was assumed to be his brother Ezra. Eventually, Elma comes downstairs, and people in the boarding house heard a conversation take place in the sitting room. Then they heard the front door open and close, and Elma and Levi and the other man, presumably Ezra, were gone. They began walking down Greenwich Street toward a Manhattan area and were encountered by a friend of Elma. This woman said she recognized Elma, and they stopped to exchange pleasantries, and that Elma was being escorted by a companion that the woman could not identify. And that companion pulled Elma away while the two ladies were chatting, which was interesting to this woman. She remembered it. It stuck in her brain. So it was December in New York, and snow coated the roads where Elma and her companion were walking down. And because the night was so frigid and cold, Elma had borrowed a fur muff from a neighbor before she left her house on Greenwich Street. So the muff is that little round fur thing that you hung around your neck or your waist and stuck your hands in to keep your hands warm, because I guess gloves weren't warm. I don't know. But the scary thing is, that was the last time Elma Sands was ever seen alive. So the last person to see her was this friend that encountered her on the street. Now, about the same time that Elma is falling in love and becoming pregnant and eloping and disappearing, New York newspapers were at the beginning of their media heyday. They were becoming the way that people learned about information. They were becoming important and getting more power, if you know what I mean. And they ran all the stories all the time. And the story they ran the morning after Elma disappeared wasn't that this beautiful Quaker girl had gone missing, but it was the death of former President George Washington. Also at that time, there was one day a year where everybody who was moving had to move at the same time. I know, weird. So if your lease ran out in December and you were moving in January, everybody did it at the same time. So weird. So the newspaper was caught up in the death of the former president and this whole moving day nonsense that just sounds weirder than weird. And it wasn't for 11 days that Elma was even found. So a few days after she had gone missing, a young boy found the muff she had been wearing near the Manhattan Well. This is a popular well in the area. And then on January 2nd, 1800, Elma's body was recovered from that well. Once she was recovered, she was laid out in the parlor of the boarding house, which was a common Quaker ritual. And then a coroner's inquest was convened. While they gathered evidence, they did a medical examination and proved that she wasn't even pregnant. So from the moment that Elma's body was discovered stuffed into the well with her dress torn, strangulation marks around her neck, the case was a media sensation. All of the New York's newspapers now found something else to fight about reporting on and covering the legal side of this case. And they named it the Manhattan Well Murder, and they wanted all the details. It sounds like newspapers haven't changed much. All right. So true crime fans, I know where you're going. Your mind is going, your gears are racing, and you're going, the boyfriend did it. You are not the only one to come to that conclusion. On January 6th, a grand jury convened, and they concluded that Elma had been deliberately killed. And 4 days after that grand jury decision on the cause of death, Elma's lover and rumored fiancé, Levi Weeks, a 23-year-old carpenter, was charged with her murder. He was apparently released on bail because the record shows that he was rearrested on the eve of his March 31st trial. The charge of murder set off what would become the nation's first media circus, as well as the first transcribed court case in American history. Now, Levi may have been an average Joe, right? He's a 23-year-old carpenter. The newspaper did report that he did not seem to have been in trouble at any point in time. He was well liked. He had a good reputation. However, his brother Ezra was somebody. He was well known, he was wealthy, and he was connected. Not organized crime connected, he just had friends in high places. And because of his wealth and connections, Ezra was able to retain 3 of New York's most prominent attorneys, a couple of which you may have heard of. Henry Livingston, Aaron Burr, and Alexander Hamilton were hired to represent Levi at the trial. Burr and Hamilton may have agreed to defend Levi for reasons other than their love for the law or their belief that Levi was innocent. They were both in debt to Ezra. This is an era of time when you could still have someone jailed for failing to pay a debt. So it was very much in their interest to stay on the good side of Ezra Weeks and his family. However, Hamilton and Burr were politicians. They were legally attorneys, but they were politicians. They did not try murder cases. And that is how Henry Livingston was pulled into the fray. Livingston was an experienced trial, and he had, in fact, had murder cases go to trial. So fast forward to March 31st, 1800. This is about 3 months after Alma was murdered, and Levi was tried for murder. Now, as we've already stated, this is the first murder trial in American history to be fully documented by a court stenographer. Levi was essentially an enemy of the public at this point. He had been convicted in the court of public opinion. He was widely believed to have committed the murder, and this is in no small part due to the stories published in the newspapers. That is where people are getting their information. It seems, though, that there were a handful of New Yorkers who believed in and held out for a due process and the presumption of innocence. So apparently, there were a few people, probably his family members and friends, who believed he was innocent. The state's case was entirely circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses. There were no forensics. There was nothing that pointed exactly as only Levi as the killer. The state used the testimony of the friend that had seen her out with a companion the last night she was seen. They claimed that Alma probably didn't tear up her own dress, strangle herself, and then throw herself down a well. And the reports are that the trial was a bit of a stage production, both because the newspaper reporters were there and because Hamilton and Burr had a reputation for making all things theatrical. The defense highlighted the possibility that Alma was a laudanum addict. Laudanum is an opiate. They questioned all the men in her life. They questioned her. Basically, they were suggesting that she was of loose morals, and any man who had reason to be in her life was questioned as to what type of relationship they had. They questioned her physical condition and the fact that she was not pregnant, but her neck was broken. And I'm like, I'm not sure why they're questioning this. This just proves that she didn't do this to herself. But then they even attacked her mental condition. They attacked her mental health. Was she, in fact, sane, depressed, and healthy? I mean, yeah, they went all the way. They did all the things. They talked about all the things. And the defense then produced a witness that testified that Levi was actually in the company of his brother Ezra and some other friends on the evening in question. I have so many issues with that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So it seems that the evidence that the state had and the evidence that the defense offered kind of outdid each other. There were 3 judges who were sitting on this trial, and Chief Justice Lansing instructed the jury that he did not believe there was sufficient proof against Levi Weeks to warrant a decision against him. But he stopped short of a directed verdict. He did not throw out the case and say, this is ridiculous, we're stopping now. He actually sent the case to the jury for deliberation. So, after instructions, the jury went to deliberate, and they deliberated for 5 whole minutes. And then they acquitted Levi Weeks of the crime. So, although the state had failed to establish its case, and the judge's instructions were proper, his charge to the jury was widely criticized. The public strongly disagreed with the verdict. Levi was generally considered a murderer. He was ostracized. People were enraged. They were mad at the state prosecutor. They were mad at the judge. They were mad at all the people. Levi eventually had to leave New York. So the reality is, this is maybe one of the oldest unsolved mysteries of the United States. We're talking 1799, people. Yeah. Okay, Levi Weeks eventually settled in Natchez, Mississippi. Natchez? I can't say that right. I'm sorry. I'm butchering it, and I'm offending everybody. I'm so sorry. He actually became a well-respected architect and builder. He even went on to marry. He married a woman named Anne Harris on the 17th of January, 1813, so about 13 years later. And they had 4 children, Caroline, Thomas, Sarah, and Levi. Now, true crime fans can visit the final resting place of poor Elma? Maybe. On the frozen morning of January 1800, where her body was found, the well was located in the middle of a damp area of wasteland known as Lippensard's Meadow. The meadow was soon to be reclaimed, filled in, developed into what is now Soho. For many years, the owners of a restaurant located at 129 Spring Street in Soho claimed that a brick well in the basement of the building was the very same well that Elma's body had been found. And people still trek to the building. It is now the site of a clothing store called Copic. People come to visit and to photograph the well. Experts are skeptical. They say it is too small to be a well. It is more like a cistern. But more specifically, that in 1799, wells were made of stone and not brick. However, Copic has done a great job of maintaining the structure. It is in the basement floor beside the sweaters. All right, so I'm going to talk about this for just a minute. I have issues with Levi's alibi because he could have been with friends after he stuffed her down a well. But also, if his brother had enough connections to basically blackmail Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr into being his brother's attorneys, they could have bought an alibi as well. I mean, let's just be real here. But here's my thing. They had enough presence of mind to investigate or to report on this case. But did anybody look into the fact to see if they actually had an appointment to get married anywhere? If they're going out for a walk late at night in the cold on a December night, supposedly, according to Elma, to get married, to elope, they're going to see a priest, a justice of the peace, or a judge. Those are the only people that can marry you. And who does that at nighttime when they're eloping? I'm just saying, I think Levi did it. Leave me a comment down below, and you tell me if you think Levi did it, or if maybe I missed something. Thank you so much for stopping by. I have a couple other videos here I think you would like, as well as a subscribe button. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did. Leave me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and have a really great day.